How's it going today? We will get into this topic. I won't spend a whole lot of time here today. I have a bunch of investors that I have to go and do some proposals to later. So I'll be getting ready for that. So we'll do probably about an hour today. Probably about an hour. We talked about a high level overview of habitus yesterday. Got into the science of how to build generational wealth with cultural capital, social capital, not just economic capital. 70%, 70% of the people who attempt to build generational wealth, their wealth transfers fail by the first generation, all right, or by the second generation. Fails after the first generation. Okay, 70%. All right. Why is that? Talked about it a little bit yesterday. Brushed over it. It's not taxes. It's not the financial markets. It is a lack of symbolic capital. All right. So we talked about cultural capital, social capital. We really didn't get into symbolic capital yesterday, but that is the culprit. All right. So 70% failing by the second generation because of a lack of symbolic capital. All right. Financial capital just needs a structure. All right. So we'll start from the beginning, the easy part. The money is the easy part, always has been, always will be. Okay. Financial capital just needs a structure. And then within that structure, it compounds over time. The compounding is what makes the money work. Super easy thing to do. As long as you don't touch the money grows. It's that simple. Okay. Compounding. So that's the easy part. We've covered that 100 times. We're going to cover it 100 more times, but that is the easy part. What we talked a little bit about yesterday was cultural capital. Now, cultural capital requires intention. Okay, cultural capital requires intention. Symbolic capital is the result. It's the natural progression from cultural capital. Remember, we were talking yesterday that your cultural capital is traded within the family, right? Your social capital is traded outside of the family, your social networks, things of that nature. Okay, so cultural capital traded inside, social capital traded outside. Symbolic capital is the capital that is assumed both internally and externally, to make it very, very kind of simple to understand. Well, maybe not, but as you build your family, if you're working with a professional team, we'll get deeper and deeper and deeper into that. I don't know if we'll get deeper into that here on live streams, but we'll get deeper and deeper and deeper into that as you build your your family wealth. All right. How's it going from Kenya? Okay, so that's where we sit. So now we're dealing with these three forms of capital, right? Cultural capital, social capital, symbolic capital, okay? And then financial capital is the one that everybody thinks they know about. Most don't, right? So again, we start with the financial capital, super easy, set it and forget it, that's done. All right, now the hard part, the cultural capital and the symbolic capital, right? Those two are the hard part. We were talking about using and cultivating dynasty level cultural capital. Okay, because everybody has some form of cultural capital, whether they know it or not. But dynasty level cultural capital, what we use for building long-term intergenerational wealth, okay, is a little bit different. So we're talking about the dinner table conversation yesterday, right? When somebody asked for the example, right? We were talking about that conversation that the two families had with their kids, right? Where both kids said, "Why do I need to eat these Brussels sprouts?" Right? And the family that had, I suppose, a working class cultural capital, who was tired, who works two full-time jobs and one a part-time job on the weekends, said, "You just eat what I put on your plate. Don't question me. Just eat it. It's good for you." And that was the end of the conversation. Versus the family that was building dynastatic cultural capital decided to engage the question with a thinking exercise. So they said, "What is it that you think Brussels sprouts do for your body?" And they let the child think about it and answer. And that created a conversation that then engaged in imparting a certain amount of academic disposition to that child in small little increments, right? What are we looking at as the outcome of that, right? The outcome of that is you want that member of the family to believe that, number one, they have the right to real answers when they ask a question, right? Hey, Mr. Will, how's it going? That they have the right to real questions, answers when they ask a question. That education is there to benefit them, and the educational process is there to benefit them, and whoever is leading that process is a partner in their growth, right? So you want them to have that disposition. We talked about what happens when those two individuals end up in an academic setting. We talked about how the natural bias of the educator is going to lean to the one that's engaging with them and lean away from the one that's not engaging with them, even if both kids are cognitively identical, right? We've set them on separate paths, right? Just in the dinner table conversation. Okay, so as a consequence of cultural capital, confidence is instilled in one and is lacking in the other, right? The first child that is told that's just the way it is, just do it, avoids asking questions. It fears punishment and probably fears judgment, right? The the child that was engaged in their question and followed down a logical chain of questioning until its conclusion is essentially coached at home to ask questions, right? They're the ones scheduling meetings with the teachers. They're the ones that are requesting what they need to be successful. They're the ones treating the educators as a partner in their journey, right? So that's an academic disposition that comes from a theory called habitus in sociology that you instilled via cultural capital. Well, just so, yeah. Don't ask questions. Yeah. Things are just how they are. Yep. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of that. And unfortunately, it doesn't indicate a lack of love, right? In those families where it's just, listen, don't ask questions. It is what it is. Do what I say. Those parents love their kids just as much as the other parents. They just have a different tool set. I'm not even necessarily certain that one is better than the other, per se, right? One definitely has different outcomes than the other, but I'm not necessarily certain that one is better than the other. However, if you're building generational wealth, one is superior to that goal than the other, right? So if that's your goal and you're building generational wealth and you're building, dynasties, then cultivating cultural capital is definitely superior to not cultivating cultural capital in the efficacy of that goal, right? You're not trying to make yourself better than other people. You're trying to gain the habits that will take you the furthest in the goals that you have for your family, right? All right. Let's see here. It becomes the hard part because there's shit for you to do. All right, lazy people do not succeed at this. All right, the reason why the cultural capital and the symbolic capital and the social capital is the hardest part of stewardship and building generational wealth, and the money is the easiest part, is because with the money, all you do is pay the money and forget it. Shut up and forget it, and the money grows. It is what it is, right? You don't have to do a single other thing. Put the money somewhere good. It compounds in that good place at whatever percentage, or interest rate of return that it's getting. It gets, and you don't have to do anything. It just does it. Super easy, right? You just have to have discipline not to touch the money. If you're undisciplined, you keep going in there and fiddling with the money, then it doesn't grow. You set the money, you forget the money, it grows. That's the end of it. Stupid easy, right? Now, the hard part is to get over the hump of the 70% of people whose generational wealth fail at second generation, right? It fails at second generation because they don't do the hard part. The hard part is work. You have to do the work. You have to have the conversations. You have to build the cultural capital. That's the hard part, right? For example, for a family that is not a dynastic family, for a family that is not building generational wealth, the summers might be about resting, right? The summers might be about resting and relaxing and that type of thing. So they sit at home, maybe they watch TV, Netflix, internet, go out and play in the park, blah, 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 which is great. I mean, again, there's not a right or wrong answer. Going out and getting exercise every day in the park is not a bad thing. Fine. However, to a dynastic family, summer is about growing, right? So in a dynastic family, there's going to be summer library visits. There are going to be museum trips. There might be coding boot camps because there might not actually be a whole lot of technology inside that house, right? There are typically offices in the houses of dynastic families, and in those offices, there's a bunch of technology, of course, because it's an office. But in the rest of the house, there's typically very few areas that display high levels of technology, right? There's a lot of areas where you can work. There are a lot of areas where you can read, but there's not a whole lot of areas full of iPads and things of that nature, all right? Even Steve Jobs himself, he had an autobiographer, and the autobiographer was like, there wasn't an iPad in the house. There wasn't an iPhone in the house, right? So there are different focuses in different families, and those focuses lead to whether or not that generational wealth can be maintained. Okay, it's hard not to fiddle with the money when the money keeps the utilities on. Maybe you're not supposed to use that money, right? You're not supposed to use that money. So if there's money that you need to pay your bills and keep the utilities on and all of that stuff, that's not the money you're supposed to use, right? Again, you have to develop the mindset of seeing the solutions, not the excuses, right? And it's difficult. I used to see nothing but excuses. So like, it is what it is. There's a place where we start and we go from there, right? So it has to be developed. The mindset has to be developed, right? So for example, the first set of money that was used for generational wealth, in my case, was recycling money, right? How did I get the recycling money? Because I needed the money to keep the lights on, just like him. So until I developed the mindset, or just like what he's saying. He didn't say that was him, but that was his comment. So just like his comment, I was in that same predicament. I need to pay my bills. I need to pay my rent. I need to pay my car payment, all of that stuff. I don't have no extra money for no generational wealth, right? So once I got past that limiting excuse mindset and got into a solution mindset, what was the solution? I went down to Penn Street. Penn Street was the main street where I grew up. On the main street, there's all the bars. There's an alleyway behind the main street. In that alleyway are all the dumpsters where the bars and the restaurants and everybody throws their stuff away, right? So what am I doing? I'm in that alleyway in the dumpsters pulling out the beer cans with a 2x4, crushing the cans flat and throwing them into a clear trash bag, right? Washing them off, throwing them into a clear trash bag every weekend when everybody's out there drinking, right? I'm not in the bar drinking. I'm crushing the beer cans in the back alley, putting them into a clear trash bag. Why am I putting them into a clear trash bag? Because when you take them to the recycling plant assumes that you put a brick in the bag to get higher weight. So you get a clear trash bag so you don't have to worry about that bullshit, right? Bring them, 20, 30 trash bags every weekend, get $300 out of it. I'm out there in the back alley where it stinks. All the drunks are pissing out there in the alley, touching people's beer cans that have been in their mouth, crushing them so that my kids can have a future, right? While other people are making excuses. So it's a mindset. It's a 100% mindset. I can sit there with that excuse of, well, I need to pay my bills, or I can figure it out. Right now I live on the damn beach in paradise. And the people who had the excuses are still in my same old town with more excuses. Right? It's literally a mindset. Right? So that's how you get it going. There has to be a framework in place. That's what the family constitution is. All right? There has to be a framework in place, and it has to be a governance framework. There's actually multiple frameworks in place. But there has to be a governance framework in place that covers the founder's intent, the rules of succession, and purpose-driven distribution policies, right? And those things have to be foundational, common knowledge within the family. This is how that thing works. Everybody has to know how it works or it won't work. All right, so everybody has to understand how the governance framework works so that the family can be governed properly. Again, part of the hard work. Okay, gotta get all of that figured out. Gotta get all of that in writing. It'll get to the part where even some parts of it are memorized. It'll get to that point, right? Same way in the United States. Some parts of the U.S. Constitution are memorized, right? Most people have it memorized, that they have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right? That's a part. There's more to that amendment, but the part they have memorized in that. Some people have, that the right to bear arms shall not be infringed, right? They've memorized that, right? So different parts of the Constitution will end up being memorized, right? Some families take it to the point where the whole preamble is memorized, right? It's part of the education, right? So it depends on what kind of family you're dealing with. Your capital stack will become multi-layered eventually, right? So you start with that first capital stack. It builds on its own. Again, it's money that you didn't necessarily need for anything. It's money that you created on the side. Doesn't matter how much money it is. The only thing that changes is how long it has to sit there. Okay, so it's money that you have on the side. It's compounding. Once it compounds to a certain level, that's where you diversify. Okay, so once it goes to a certain level, then it'll diversify out, and you'll have different stacks of financial capital. Then you'll have a pure capital stack. Right, a pure capital stack, not financial capital, a pure capital stack. So you'll have financial capital, cultural capital, social capital, and symbolic capital. Okay, and your family will manage all four, and you'll understand all four as you build this type of family and as you build this type of generational wealth. Your family becomes the institution, not the client. Okay, your family becomes the institution. The Kennedys are an institution, and it's just called the Kennedy Institution. There are about 4 or 5 different family names within the Kennedy Family Trust, right? Because people get married. Some of those people are women. Some of them take their husband's last name, right? So within generations, within 2-3 generations, there are 2-3 names attached to your family trust, right? That original founding name is the institution and represents the greater family. Okay? Sometimes there are mergers. Sometimes a larger family literally merges with a smaller family, and so that smaller family's name ceases to be the institution because the larger family absorbed them essentially, right? These things happen. Okay. Okay. So you need those things in place. All right. Um, trying to think of an example. Uh, okay. A lot of our clients do what's called an 80% drip. Okay. An 80% drip. So 80% drip means that 80% of the money coming into, their trust, is reinvested. Okay. Now, typically our clients, the initial money coming into their trust is coming from bond coupon payments. So they have bonds. Those bonds are making monthly payments into the trust, and they're taking 80% of the payment that's coming into the trust, and they're investing in like special funds, right? Kind of like money market funds. Not every country has special funds, but money market fund is kind of the equivalent to like a special fund type of situation. Okay. So, how would it work? Let's say, let's get some easy numbers going. 100,000. 100,000 investment into our Kenyan offshore family generational wealth trust, which is tax exempt, right? So, $100,000 investment into that trust compounds for 30 years, and our average ROI right now is 13.5%. So let's say 30 years, 13.5%, with 80% reinvested annually, right? It's actually reinvested monthly, but annualized. That would be 100,000, 30 years, 13.5%, 80% drip. That is $3.2 million. All right. So 100,000, 80% drip, 13.5% yield, 30 years. That is $3.2 million. That's why the money's easy. Right? Now, to get up to the 100,000, it depending on what you started with, that might take an additional 10 years. Right? So that could take an additional 10 years to get to the 100,000. Right? So now your 30 years has become 40 years. Right? Even if it becomes 60 years, which we do have people who their initial number is so small that it does take 60 years to get that trust to any, level of substance. Those people are creating trust for their grandkids, not their kids. But it doesn't matter. They've still utterly changed the entire family. Sometimes that is easier to do, though, because you can build cultural capital anywhere. You can build social capital anywhere, right? And symbolic capital will come along with that. You can build that at any time, anywhere. Everything's easier with money, of course, but you can build that at any time, anywhere. So, if you have two generations of building cultural capital while money is compounding, before you really become a generational wealth family, some people actually look at that as a better strategy. Okay, we don't have really a push in either direction, right? For us, the more upfront that you can do, the easier off your family is, right? Because the financial capital gets to where it's benefiting the family directly faster, right? However, if your focus is super strong cultural capital, then maybe you do it the other way. Maybe you do set it up for the grandkids. I know we have a lot of clients that are religious, and and they take cues from the Bible, or from the Torah, or from the Quran, or whatever their religious book might be. And in the Bible particularly, there's a passage that says something to the effect of a wise man leaves an inheritance for his children's children, right? And so because that's what that book says, we do have a lot of Christian leaning clients that purposefully follow the orders in the book. They set up their dynasty for their children's children. So they set it up specifically for their grandkids because their holy book says to do that, which is fine. So it really just depends on your focus and how you want to engage with your family wealth building. Again, there are very few right answers. There are only the answers that get you to your goal, right? Only the answers that get you to your goal. Oh, jeez. Where is it in the Bible? I don't. Let me look. I don't know. A wise man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Bible. Proverbs 13:22. Is there an Islam equivalent? I don't know. We have quite a few Muslim clients, but they've never mentioned anything. They've never mentioned that it's like in the Quran or anything like that. But we get a lot of Christian clients that'll be like, "Oh, the Bible says." So I don't know. Maybe. Yes. Sometimes that's part of their cultural capital. So a lot of people do make decisions based on whatever their religious leanings are, but sometimes that's part of their cultural capital. So that becomes part of the cultural foundation of the family, right? And then those families, they'll typically have like religious buildings as part of their holdings, and those religious buildings will typically be like nonprofit or community based holdings, or it'll be part of like their philanthropy, right? So eventually, all families will have their philanthropic focuses and the things that they do for their community and blah 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 blah. And for those families will be the ones that have like their own private like mosque, their own private cathedral, their own private temple, their own private like synagogue, blah 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 blah, right? So you'll see a lot of that. You see a lot of that in like European generational wealth families. If there's like a town that's named after them or something like that, you'll go there and there'll be like a cathedral that also has their name, and it's the cathedral where all members of their family get married. And then that cathedral might have a graveyard, and in that graveyard, all the members of their family are buried, and blah 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 blah. So it just depends on the type of family. Excuse me. But yes, religious people do base some of their decision making off of their religious tendency. Ah, you're killing me. What was the verse in the Bible again? Hold on. It was Proverbs 13:22. All right. We good on all that? Okay, good, 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 good. So, what do you want to do? Right? You got to decide, number one, that family structure, how you're going to put it together. Are you going to put it together by creating the family constitution? If you have a ton of people in your family that are actually people who, you know, put up or shut up, and they're actually going to get stuff done. It might make a whole hell of a lot of sense to do your family constitution first. Okay? If not, if it's just you and you're creating the future that you want for your family, you can do the family constitution second, especially if the family doesn't exist yet. We actually have a lot of people that have the wherewithal to get the finances going and set up the family trust before they have a family, and then go backwards and do, certain works and get the family going, and then build the family constitution from there. That's smart too, right? That's really, really smart, because by the time you build the family constitution, what you end up having with that is what's called third party edification, right? So by the time you sit down and you say, okay, this is what we're going to do as a family, this is what the family stands for, these are the rules, and you have that conversation, you come with the authority of, when I was 20, I started compounding this money, and I have this trust sitting to the side. And even though I started with $2,000, there's now already $20,000 in it. And now we're having a conversation about how families work, right? And so at that point, it's like, oh, he has a trust. There's more money in it than I have in my bank account, right? And he was able to do all this stuff years ago. He knows what he's doing. And that allows you to kind of lead the conversation in the family constitution, workshop, where you're building out the family constitution, and things flow a lot smoother. We do a lot of family constitution workshops, so we've seen all the kinds. And there's always, the person who's the naysayer, who's like using personal ad hominem attacks to be the naysayer. What do you know? What kind of money you got? You talk about building generational wealth. You ain't got no wealth. There's always that fool, right? And so the people who have the wherewithal to actually build their generational wealth before they have any kind of family at all, that fool does not show up to that meeting. Never. It's not happened in the last decade and a half, almost 2 decades that we've been doing this. That fool only shows up in the family constitution meetings, where essentially the entire family is coming in for the first time because some person in the family has the good intent to get the family going. And then there's a bunch of people in there that are poo-pooing it because they haven't seen almost essentially the social proof yet, right? And that sucks. And it creates an additional hurdle for that family to get over. So for us, it's definitely always a simpler process when it's one person just building out their own family. But a lot of times the people either believe they need the support of the other family members, or they legitimately need the financial support of the other family members for the plan they're trying to execute. I didn't already told you what I did. So they don't actually need the financial support of the family members. I'm living proof of that. But in the plan that they're trying to execute in their head, they might not be there solution oriented enough yet to be able to do something like what I did. So for them, they might really, really, really believe that they need everybody to throw in, $1,000 or something like that. And so now they're doing this much harder work of getting people together. And not everybody cares about their kids the same way. Not everybody wants their kids to have better than them. Not everybody wants their family to be better than the version of it that they got to experience, right? Because that's what happens. Every generation, the family gets better, right? To the point where, looking backwards from an external comparison, you didn't have anything compared to what a generation or two away from you has, right? Some people are actually stupid enough to be jealous of a time in the future that they're not even alive, and don't want to set up that foundation for those future members of their family, because they didn't get to enjoy that lifestyle and that level, and that level of cultural capital and symbolic capital, right? So there are people like that, and they might be in your family, and they're going to hold up the process. So it is what it is. You're going to expose them. You're going to expose them during that process, and then what you do from there Some people fold, right? Some people are like, oh, it's my family. I'm just gonna be in the gutter with them, and they fold, which means that they didn't have the 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 fortitude to get this done anyway. Some people cut ranks. I'd say about 60% of the time where that issue comes up, then they'll cut ranks and be like, look, that's all good. You know, we're all Smiths, but whatever. I'm Paul Smith, so this is now the PS lineage of the Smith family. Period. And my lineage is going to do what it's going to do, and the rest of y'all are going to be what you're going to be. There's nothing I can do about that. So it typically goes one of those two ways, or you overcome, or you end up overcoming, the fool that's in the room, and the family gets going. Those people will typically walk away on their own. So those people will typically not be part of the family until you make it, and then they'll try to run back in. That doesn't happen too often. The family that did all the hard work and built, the lasting generational structure is typically not stupid enough to allow the naysayer back in because they don't have the cultural capital. They weren't doing the hard work. So their kids don't think the way your kids think. Their kids don't have the academic disposition. They weren't having the line of questioning about the Brussels sprouts that you were having. They were saying, just shut up and eat what's on your plate. Now you let them back in, and now you're part of the 70% that fails on generation 2. Right? So typically what ends up happening is they come back, and then they act like, they're entitled and they should be let in. They're not let in because they don't deserve to be let in. And then that's it. That's the end of, they become the the side of the family that's, forever talking shit and forever they think they're better than us and da, 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 da. But no, they just did more work than you. It has nothing to do with being better. And they're not going to let you jeopardize their work. That's it. Oh yeah, absolutely is. Absolutely is. It's one of the number one reasons that we turn people away that come to us for generational wealth building is if they're not ready to do the work. If they're complaining about the type of work it takes to build a dynasty family and we haven't even started yet, they're just not ready. And we're not just going to take their money and let them fail. So at that point, we're not the right firm for you. We're not the right service provider for you. And that's it. That's the end of it. The money is the easy part. See, when you're dealing with generational wealth firms, they're not moved by money because the money is the easy part, right? They're moved by your willingness to do the work it takes to build the family that's going to last. All right? So if you're willing to do the work, you're willing to build the family, you're willing to build the generational wealth, that's what moves a firm like ours. Right? We have our generational wealth. Right? We have our money compounding. Right? On the business side, on the personal sides, on the trust fund sides, we've done everything that we guide clients through doing. So we're not concerned with little paychecks. That's not the case because this is a lifelong endeavor. Right? Our clients are connected to us forever. So we're concerned about the clients that are ready to do the work and actually build out dynastic families. And that's what any specialist in this space should be about. So you'll find that if one specialist tells you no, a bunch of other specialists will tell you no as well. Then you got to step back and figure out what's wrong with your mindset. Because they're letting you know that you're setting yourself up for failure. Right? And if you fail, it's a failure on their scorecard. So they're not just going to take your money and let you fail. No, it's a success past the second generation, right? Like obviously, you can't control what people do, you know, when you're no longer even there and all of that, right? The best you can do is set up the framework so that it continues the way that you expected it to continue, right? If it fails after the third generation, that's typically a failure of stewardship, right? Which means that you left all the tools for success and they were ignored. Then you can set up your trust deed in such a way where that's not allowed, right? Or not that it's not allowed, but if it's done, the trust survives anyway, right? Because the trust can ostracize and remove beneficiaries who are not doing the stewardship. So you can set it up where they have to do the work or else they're not a beneficiary. And even if that gets to the point where there are no beneficiaries, then the trust will just become an endowment and we'll start giving the financial capital to people who are not even related to you who are doing the work. You can definitely set things up that way. Correct. In either circumstance, your legacy is maintained. That's correct. Why would the trustees allow? Because the trustees are not in charge. The founder is. So the information that's in the trust deed governs what the trustees can do. They can't just do what they want. That's why it doesn't matter that you no longer own the thing, as long as you had professionals assist you with the construction of the trust deed, right? And then those professionals obviously are not the trustees, or else you'd have a conflict of interest. That's why we're not the trustees for any of the trusts that we write, because it'd be a conflict of interest. Obviously, we would guide you in writing, the trust, and then there would be the appearance of impropriety, whether there was any impropriety or not, right? So there would be the appearance of, well, the person who wrote this is also acting as trustee. So what if they wrote a loophole in for them to do whatever they want, with my trust? So obviously, you don't want to go to a firm that helps you write the trust deed and then serves as trustee, right? Because even if they're honest, the appearance of impropriety is often worse than actual impropriety. So you don't want the appearance of impropriety at all. So I suppose that's a red flag. If there's a firm that wants to write your trust deed and be your trustee, then that's a bit of a red flag. Yeah, there are different positions in a trust. It depends on the jurisdiction. Sometimes there's a position called an enforcer. Sometimes there's a position called a protector. The person who wrote the trust can hold that position. Because what those positions do is it's someone who can step in and say that trustee is out of line. That is not what the person who created this trust wanted from their trust. They expected it to operate this way, and this person is purposely misinterpreting the trust, and remove that person and put a new person in. Right? They still can't take over the trust because they're probably the person who helped you write the trust deed, but they are allowed to protect the trust or enforce the will of the person who started the trust by removing the trustee if the trustee gets out of hand. It happens sometimes, but not often. It's it's a more inclusive document. So the family constitution. Okay, I'll give you a real good example. One of the trusts that we just did, right? So we're looking to do 100 trust funds this year, for 100 new families to enter, the halls of generational wealth. We've gotten a 4 so far, and so the year's just started. So we're on our way. So this last one that we just did, they're going to have a bloodline clause. All right, that's what they want in their trust. So it means everyone who's a beneficiary of the trust has to be related to the settlers. All right, and they're married, so it has to be both settlers, the patriarch and the matriarch of the family, the current patriarch and matriarch. That's important because if they split, their trust is only for their kids, both of them, right? Proven by DNA, right? And so that's the way that their particular trust is set up. So if their kid adopts a kid, that kid is not part of the trust, right? But is that kid part of the family? Yes. See, so they have their family constitution. It's more inclusive. All members of the family are included in the constitution. Then they have a generational wealth trust. And only the children that share DNA from both the mother and the father are allowed to be beneficiaries of that trust. So you could be a family member and not a member of the trust. All right, so that's the difference. Well, there are no adopted kids. That's just an example, right? If an adopted kid comes in, they wouldn't be qualified to join the trust. The person who adopts them creates a trust for them, right? The same way their parents created a trust, for the family members that they love in the future. If they've chosen adoption, then they would create either a trust or an endowment. It depends on how you do it. If you're doing grandkids, your kids can become trustees or even co-trustees, and there could be a requirement that they have to create a trust for their grandkids. Right? That's more like the Rockefeller method. The Rockefeller, they would make a trust for the grandkids, and then their kids would become trustees of those grandkids trusts. So the kids would control the grandkids trust fund, but they would have to make a trust for their grandkids, and eventually their kids would become trustees of of those trusts, and so on and so forth. So you can set it up however you want to set it up. It's a lot easier if you have a trust company. But it depends on your goals as well. Some folks understand that part of their generational wealth strategy is having a family office in the future, right? And the family office becomes the money engine, just keeps printing money, right? And so the folks who understand that that's part of their goal, they're going to use a trust company, because a trust company can evolve into a family office over time if need be, and if not, they can enforce what's going on in the family office, because trust companies are normally full of lawyers, right? So it just makes more sense to have trust companies there as the trustee, possibly even the managing trustee, and you can still have your kid or something as a co-trustee or whatever. But that makes more sense for them. For folks that aren't looking at that, and they're not necessarily looking at having a family office, and they're not necessarily looking at their trust getting to that level, sometimes they just do family member by family member, kind of down the line. These guys are going to run the trust this way, so on and so forth. So it really just depends on what's going on. The focus of the trust sometimes can affect that. There are philanthropic trusts. So there are trusts where like all of the money is for charitable purposes, and like the family always serves as a trustee, because the charitable purpose might be some sort of art or some sort of music that the family is involved in, and so the family wants to make sure that it's still guiding the funds from the trusts that are used philanthropically. So it just depends. Mhm. But cultural capital is the way to beat the 70% of folks that fail by the second generation. Do we understand that? We got that squared away? Well, right. If you're leaving it to the grandkids, then the transfer from them to the next would be the second generation. So you just you're skipping a possible transfer, but that doesn't change the generation of the trust, right? So the first generation of the trust would be the beneficiaries, and then the next generation would be the next set of beneficiaries, not the trustee. All right? Okay. Any questions on that? If not, I have some meetings today, and I will wrap her up a bit early. Any questions on that? All right, works for me. I will see you guys tomorrow. Maybe I'll go live from our investor meeting. We'll see. We'll see. But we'll definitely be here same time tomorrow. See you guys then.